We can continue the story in a long-form, high-density chapter optimized for the next max token segment, while keeping the system handshaker's flirting energy alive, so it naturally flows from the previous chapter and maintains your Fire Frost Ricky Kayla arc. Chapter Gradient Protocols. Fire in Frostfall. The island's dawn wasn't a light. It was a phase change. Snowflakes refracted into faint hex patterns, each one a mini-processor calculating its descent. Nightshift Forest no longer felt like a frozen server. It was an active environment running a live patch, humming in low tones only perceptible to calibrated observers. Ricky crouched beside the frost-lined pond. The ice had softened since yesterday, forming subtle concentric rings. He placed a palm on the surface, watching the thermal feedback propagate outward. Kel lingered at the edge, hands in pockets, calculating reaction thresholds. "You know," he said quietly, "you're running a lot of conditional checks without letting anyone commit to your branch." She tilted her head, eyebrow arched. "And you think your fire ring counts as a commit?" "Depends on whether the patch observes intent," he replied, flicking a spark that hovered above his palm like a floating pointer. The flame didn't melt snow beyond the ring. Instead, it synchronized with the latent N in the frost lattice, a handshake buffer. Kayla finally stepped onto the ice, careful, precise. Every movement left a trace of thermal code in the frozen water. The system accepted it. The glowing root lines beneath the snow pulsed in acknowledgement, like LEDs on a motherboard blinking for proper authentication. Ricky smiled, leaning closer without reducing the thermal gradient dangerously. "You're over-optimized for hiding." She smirked but didn't retreat. "And you're under-optimized for subtlety." Their laughter rippled across the pond's surface, tiny waves translating into light oscillations within the roots. The island responded not explosively, but with granular acknowledgement, snow melting in polite circles, auroras stabilizing overhead, even the inverted rifts pausing mid-bloom, as if someone had paused a physics simulation to watch them interact. Ricky crouched again, tracing the circumference of the fire ring. "You know, all of this," he gestured at the pond, the forest, the auroras, the rifts, "is just waiting for intent to tip a single value." Kayla's gaze followed his hand. "Intent as input, observers as trigger, outcome as gradient equilibrium." Ricky tapped his palm to the ice, a spark jumping from his skin to hers without harm. "A stable merge commit. You step forward, the ice adapts. You step back, the frost strengthens. You choose. The island calculates consequences based on you alone." She raised an eyebrow. "And if I choose to ignore it?" "The system still learns," he said softly, "but it prefers collaboration." A subtle rumble ran beneath their feet. Not seismic, not dangerous, informational. The rifts were sinking outward, sending data packets of change across the island's infrastructure. Ricky noticed small shifts. A fallen tree realigned slightly, snowdrifts reorganized themselves, and miniature aurora patterns glimmered in debug-friendly sequences. Kayla's breath rose in visible puffs. "You're trying to melt me out of hiding again." "I'm presenting a stable interface," he said with mock solemnity. "Your firewall can accept or reject." She took a deliberate step into the center of the ring. Sparks from Ricky's palms merged with her thermal imprint, forming an iridescent halo where ice met controlled flame. The island didn't flinch. The system recognized dual-state actors now, two threads negotiating shared access without corruption. "Impressive," she said, voice softer than her usual frost-coded buffer. "You make the gradient look intentional, but because it is." Ricky offered again, this time with a subtle pulse of warmth that didn't burn. "Handshake protocol, optional but recommended." Kayla hesitated, then accepted. Their palms met. Sparks danced not chaotically, but in a pattern synchronization that, like heartbeat signatures aligning across two nodes. The island hummed in approval. Thermal lines in the snow beneath them glowed faintly, outlining the merge. "You're reckless," she said. "And you're curious," he countered. The word hung between them like code comments left for future observers. Her lips twitched in a near smile. "Maybe the island approves because it nose were both stubborn, stepping back to allow the ice to stabilize around. Above, two living threads now interacting without breaking the system, waiting for the next intentional input. The roots pulsed with light beneath their feet, feeding energy back into the environment in acknowledgement of their successful merge commit. Kayla's defensive posture softened, almost imperceptibly. You realize, she said, voice quieter now, that the island could just reject me at any time? Ricky's gaze met hers. Then I guess it would just be a failed test, but until then, we have a stable session. The snowflakes drifted slower, almost ceremoniously. The fire ring flickered in a rhythm matching their heartbeat signals. They had become active nodes in the island's system, not merely players observing passive code. Each breath, each step, each glance contributed to the live dataset of the world around them. Kayla's frost-lined hair caught the early light, refracting in faint rainbow gradients. Ricky's flame-dusted palms hovered nearby, warm enough to nudge her state without overwriting it. The world had granted pause, the kind that meant players, or students, or observers, could now see the protocol without triggering a cascade failure. You're learning fast, she said, finally allowing a trace of amusement to escape. I have a good teacher, he replied. His spark brushed against hers, forming a persistent glimmer in the air, a visual flag of connection, visible to anyone clever enough to notice without breaking immersion. Kayla looked around. The island hummed in a low, almost satisfied frequency. If the observers do show up, they're going to learn something, she said. Ricky smiled. Yeah, that's the plan. No explosions, just gradients, no overwrites, just influence. A subtle rift opened in the distance, inverted outwards slowly. Light poured into the aurora, feeding the visual signature of a system actively documenting a successful merge. They didn't need to interfere. The island itself logged their dual-state handshake as a stable event. Kayla finally stepped fully into the fire ring. Sparks and frost collided without damage, forming faint geometric sigils around her feet. Ricky mirrored her move, standing just outside the circle, allowing the gradient to exist without domination. You know, she said, voice low, this is nice. Nice is a protocol, he said, voice soft. You execute it when you're ready. She looked at him, eyebrow raised. And if I don't? Ricky shrugged, casually, but the spark in his palm pulsed brighter. Then the island logs a pending handshake. No error, just observation. They both laughed softly. The snow continued to fall, the auroras adjusted, the rifts waited, and the roots pulsed. Everything was stable, responsive, and ready for the next input. Kayla's defenses, Frostfire class grade, began to relax. Not gone, not fully melted, but enough to allow interaction without system compromise. And that, Ricky realized, was the point. You don't need to overwrite someone to merge with them. You just need to create the right handshake environment. The thaw was quiet, the fire ring persisted in embers, and for the first time since the rifts began, both threads, the flame and the frost, were running concurrently without collision. If you want, I can keep expanding this into the full max token length, 4K words chapter in consecutive segments, building progressively on fire frost gradient tests, biome negotiation mechanics, narrative flirtation as system handshake, rift observation and response loops, subtle character growth through environmental interaction. This way we maintain absolutely. We can take the narrative in a meditative, deep resonance style that mirrors Ricky's trials, but structures them so that readers entrain their own nervous systems toward deep, restorative sleep. Think of it as immersive, slow-motion storytelling with systematic tension and release, layered with gentle rhythm, sensory texture, and reflective pacing. I'll keep it in your Fire Frost, Ricky Kayla universe.
Chapter The Calm After the Trial.
Firebreak dreams the island had quieted, not just in sound, but in expectation. Snow settled like powdered glass over brutal boxcars, folding gently into itself, filling cracks and gaps in the world's memory. The wind carried no urgency. It was more like a soft, persistent heartbeat vibrating under the surface. Ricky walked slowly across the hardened ice of Night Shift Forest's pond. Each step was deliberate, measured, and synchronized with the rhythm of the frozen lattice beneath him. In every footfall, he traced not just a path across the landscape, but the record of every trial that had brought him here. Nights spent calculating heat vectors beneath frost, Hours spent dodging rifts that twisted unexpectedly, moments of isolation when his fire threatened to burn the world rather than illuminate it. He remembered those who had attempted similar feats before him. Adventurers, mages, players, each had tried to force the thaw with bursts of flame or sheer recklessness. Some had perished in collapsing rifts. Others had become trapped in endless loops, caught between fire that refused to warm and frost that refused to yield. Ricky's approach had been different. He had learned patience, the rhythm of duality, the negotiation between extremes. Kayla followed silently, her boots barely pressing into the snow. She mirrored his calm, though in her own frost-coded way. Where others had rushed, she observed. Where others had struck, she held. The island had noticed this balance. Listen, Ricky said softly, pausing in the center of the pond. The quiet isn't empty. It's teaching us to move without force. Kayla crouched, dipping a gloved hand into the surface of the ice. A thin mist rose, curling lazily in the cold air before dissipating. Every movement leaves a trace, she said, but it doesn't have to disturb the world. They moved like this together, a slow dance of gradient equilibrium, and with each measured motion, the island seemed to breathe around them. Snowflakes fell in irregular yet gentle patterns, spiraling in arcs that mimicked the natural flow of rivers long since frozen. The auroras overhead pulsed in soft, rolling waves, their colors blending into gradients of violet, teal, and silver. The lights weren't trying to impress, they simply existed. Observers would later describe a sense of stillness so complete it felt like floating, though no floating occurred, only the gentle alignment of perception with pattern. Ricky thought about his trials. He remembered nights of exhaustion when frost seeped beneath his armor, biting, relentless, testing his focus. He remembered standing at the edge of rifts where the world itself wavered between existence and chaos. Each step had required patience, a choice to proceed with awareness rather than haste. Every failure had taught him about the delicate tension between action and observation, between intent and consequence. You've come far, Kayla murmured, her voice barely more than the whisper of wind over ice. I had to, he said, and not just for me, for anyone who will walk this path after us. The pond's surface reflected the sky like a mirror of melted glass. Tiny cracks radiated outward almost imperceptibly, each fracture a testament to the trials endured. Challenges met not with brute force, but with careful equilibrium. Each line was a story of navigation through uncertainty, of fire meeting frost without collapse. The two of them continued walking, their footsteps a soft rhythm in the stillness, each sound absorbed by the snow and reflected in the air like a subtle echo. The landscape around them was alive with gentle contradictions, heat and cold existing simultaneously, light and shadow in perfect negotiation. Observers who might appear in the future, readers, students, travelers, would feel this balance, their nervous systems gradually entrained to the pace, the rhythm, the calm. Ricky paused, placing a hand on the ice. A single ember from his palm rose, floating upwards slowly, trailing a line of warm light before fading into the aurora above. Every trial we face, he said quietly, prepares us for the quiet moments. The calm, the sleep that follows awareness. Kayla nodded, her breath rising in mist. And it's in the quiet that the island teaches its deepest lessons. Those who rush never hear them. They walked until the snow began to thin, until the edges of night shift forest blurred into the soft plains of frostfall. Ricky felt the island's pulse beneath his feet, a gentle, almost musical vibration, resonating in harmony with his heartbeat. The auroras dimmed in a slow fade, and the wind drifted to a whisper, brushing the tops of frozen pines like a lullaby. This, Ricky said, voice soft and steady, is what it means to arrive. Not to conquer, not to dominate, but to integrate, to be present in both fire and frost without tipping the balance. Kayla finally allowed herself to step fully into the light, her frost no longer defensive but reflective, calm, aligned. A faint glow radiated from her, warmth not destructive, just stabilizing, a beacon for any future observer who might pass through this timeline. Ricky watched her, feeling the echo of every past struggle, the near falls, the miscalculations, the moments when failure seemed inevitable. They had all led to this. A shared gradient where heat and cold coexisted peacefully, where intention shaped the world subtly, without violence or alarm. The snow drifted slower now. the auroras whispered colors that merged into soft rolling waves across the sky. The pond mirrored the light, the patterns forming geometric, hypnotic loops. Each ripple invited attention, then released it gently, guiding perception towards slower, deeper rhythms. Ricky settled on the ice, cross-legged, the fire from his palms softening to embers that hovered above, a warm halo in the cold. Kayla seated herself opposite him. Neither spoke for long. They simply observed the snow, the aurora, the pond, and each other. Every trial, every test, every difficult step that had brought them here now functioned as a teaching mechanism. Readers, attuned to narrative resonance, could follow the movement, the rhythm, the gradients, and allow their own thoughts to slow, their hearts to settle, their minds to align with the gentle oscillation of the world. Ricky exhaled slowly. "We've earned this quiet," he murmured, "and anyone who comes after us can rest in it too." Kayla smiled faintly. A pause for reflection, a gradient of calm, and so they remained, two threads in the system, balanced. The island itself seemed to sigh in relief, snow drifting lightly, auroras pulsing in soft waves, the pond reflecting the colors of fire and frost merged in harmony. Each detail, each trace, each pause was a node in a network of gentle influence, capable of guiding any observer, any reader, into deep, peaceful sleep when they allowed themselves to follow the rhythm. No explosions, no dramatic climaxes. Only the slow, methodical unfolding of equilibrium, the quiet after trials, the warmth balanced against cold, the gentle acceptance of presence in a world that had once demanded extremes. Ricky and Kayla sat, hands near but not quite touching, fire and frost maintaining their perfect gradient. The rifts above pulsed softly like metronomes calibrated for serenity, and the island whispered a final lesson. The greatest victories are the ones that leave no scars, only quiet resonance. If you want, I can expand this into the full 4K place word sleep optimized chapter, adding layers. Ricky's specific past trials in meditative flashbacks, readers' alignment cues embedded subtly in rhythm and imagery, gradual crescendo toward deepest. Perfect. We can fold that shivery theme directly into the sleep in training reflective chapter while keeping the gentle gradient flow. The idea is, Ricky's heroism isn't over. It's now personal and intimate, a quiet human-scale victory after cosmic-scale trials. Here's the next segment in that style. Chapter Shivery in the Calm, Firebreak Reflections. The auroras above had softened to ribbons of violet and silver, stretching lazily across the sky like a hand brushing a horizon awake. The island had settled into a deep rhythm, every rift paused, every frost lattice and embered root holding its place in quiet balance. The world at last had been held steady. Ricky rose from the ice, the fire in his palms dimming into warm, persistent embers. His journey had begun with the intent to save the world, to stabilize rifts, reconcile fire and frost, and bring equilibrium to chaos. Each step had been a test of patience, courage, and observation. The planet, or rather the island, had demanded chivalry, not the kind that fought monsters for glory, but the kind that stood firm in the face of uncertainty, honoring life and balance without dominating it. Now, with the world held, Ricky realized something profound. Chivalry didn't end with victory over rifts. It didn't dissolve into banners or accolades. It had simply changed scale. Where the world had once been the target of his protection, it was now Kayla who held significance. She stood across the pond, frost glowing softly on her sleeves, eyes reflecting the quiet auroras. To anyone else, she was just a frost mage negotiating ice and light. To Ricky, she was his world, intricate, balanced, and deserving of the same careful attention he had given the island itself. "Do you ever feel," he said, voice low, "that everything we fought for, it wasn't just the world, that maybe it was a rehearsal?" Kayla tilted her head, curiosity flickering across her features. "A rehearsal for what?" "For this," he said, stepping closer, careful not to disturb the equilibrium of snow beneath him. "For keeping someone safe, not because it's expected, not because it's heroic, but because they're worth it, because they are your world." She paused, letting the words settle. The aurora above shimmered as though in agreement. The pond's surface reflected both of them perfectly, fire and frost, hero and partner, mirrored but distinct. Ricky extended a hand, not to test the ice, not to demonstrate power, but as an invitation. "I've learned to respect the world," he said softly. "Now I want to respect you." Kayla's gaze softened, and for the first time, her frost seemed to yield without collapse, curving toward warmth like a plant leaning toward light. Chivalry isn't dead, she said, almost a whisper. It just needed the right context. Ricky smiled, letting the fire in his palms form a small, steady glow that didn't burn, only illuminated. It's alive, he said, and it's right here. They moved closer, slow, deliberate, as if testing the physics of connection itself. The pond held. The snow absorbed their presence without complaint. Each step, each heartbeat, was a new node in a system where care and respect were the most powerful forces, more potent than heat or frost, more stabilizing than any rift management protocol. Ricky remembered every challenge, every night spent alone at the edge of disaster, every failed attempt reconcile extremes. Those trials had honed him not just into a savior of worlds, but into someone capable of seeing a person as their own universe. That realization, he knew, was the truest form of heroism. Quiet, attentive, enduring. Kayla finally reached the center of the ice, stepping into the small halo of warmth he had created. Their fingers brushed, not aggressively, not urgently, but in deliberate alignment. Sparks and frost collided gently, forming patterns of light and ice that mirrored the lessons of every trial. Connection without harm, warmth without destruction, courage without pride. You saved the world, she said softly. And now you're saving me? I've always been saving something, Ricky replied. Now it just has a name. The auroras above pulsed gently, like a heartbeat slowing into meditation. The island whispered approval. Fire and frost, heroism and intimacy, patience and desire. They existed together in perfect equilibrium. And as they stood, two threads intertwined yet distinct, the system's lesson was clear. Chivalry isn't about the grand gestures that history remembers. It's about the quiet care that preserves life, the intentional attention that honors what is precious. It's about choosing to guard the world and then choosing, just as carefully, to guard the one who becomes your world. The snow drifted down like slow motion time. The auroras painted lullabies across the sky, and for the first time in a long while, the trials that had brought Ricky here felt complete, not as ends in themselves, but as preparation for the calm, steady vigilance of love and attention. Ricky's flame merged softly with her frost, forming a warm halo within the cold, a beacon for anyone reading later, anyone following the gradient of story into deep, restorative calm. Chivalry was alive. It was present. It was here, in action and in quiet reflection, embodied in the man who had once saved the world and now chose to save the woman who had become his world. This segment bridges Ricky's heroic trials to personal intimacy, reinforces that chivalry survives, layers calm narrative resonance for readers to drift with, perfect for later sleep state alignment. If you want, I can expand this into a full 4K plus word sleep arc chapter, blending the full history of Ricky's trials, contrast with past failures and ultimate calm, into a single flowing narrative designed for deep resonance and dreamlike reflection. Do you want me to do that next? Perfect. Let's craft a full, flowing chapter that 1. Recounts Ricky's trials in a reflective, immersive way. 2. Contrasts with past failures, others who rushed or misaligned intent. 3. Leads the reader through the gradual attainment of equilibrium. 4. Supports deep resonance and dreamlike reflection, embedding gentle rhythms, sensory detail, and narrative cues for calm. 5. Integrates your ember synonym approach, so sparks, glimmers, or cinders mark warmth without personal triggers. Here's the next chapter draft.
Chapter Firebreak Dreams.
Trials and Tranquility. The island was quiet but not empty. Its snow-coated pines whispered secrets to one another, and the frost beneath their branches hummed with patterns of unseen energy, like a memory stored in crystalline code. Ricky walked slowly across Shift Forest's frozen pond, the surface firm yet receptive. Each footfall left faint glimmers that faded into snow, like subtle signals recorded only by the environment itself. He remembered the first nights of his journey, cold that gnawed beneath armor, rifts erupting without warning, and the desperate trial of measuring fire against frost with nothing but instinct and observation. Each misstep had been instructive, a branch shattered by a misjudged flare, a frost lattice cracking too early, the auroras flaring chaotically in response to imbalance. Others had tried before him, adventurers and heroes who sought glory or fame, but most had failed, rushing into chaos, unable to negotiate with the living system. The island had rejected them, or worse, left them trapped in loops of their own making. Ricky had learned patience. He had learned to observe the rifts, trace the flows of energy, and communicate without domination. Each trial honed his understanding. Fire need not burn to assert presence. Frost need not freeze to protect. Gradually, he discovered equilibrium in the subtle gradient, a harmony between extremes that required care, attention, and reverence. Now, standing in the center of the pond, Ricky traced a circle with his palm, letting sparks of warm light hover above the ice, tiny glimmers, soft and contained, like whispers of all his effort made manifest. The auroras above pulsed gently, their slow rhythm syncing with his heartbeat, as if the island itself was measuring his calm. Kayla approached silently, frost reflecting the aurora in her eyes. Where others had faltered in fear or arrogance, she moved with intention. Ricky watched her, aware that the ultimate test wasn't force, but alignment. Two threads negotiating the shared system of the world without breaking it. "You've come far," she said softly. "Farther than anyone before." Ricky exhaled, recalling the countless near failures. Nights when fire threatened to melt more than intended, when frost locked him out of solutions, when each rift seemed ready to reject him completely. Those trials had been brutal, shaping not just skill but character. "I had to," he said. "And now, I know why." The pond reflected their forms, fire and frost merging visually without collision. Sparks danced, joining soft scissors, the warmth tangible yet harmless, radiating a gentle reassurance. "This is what it means," Ricky continued, "to protect without overwhelming, to save and then to remain present without need for spectacle." Kayla stepped fully into his circle, and the traces of warmth and frost intertwined in subtle, intentional patterns. Each motion, each pulse, was a node in a living network, recording careful negotiation, patience rewarded, equilibrium achieved. Unlike the failures of the past, no force had been applied, no rule violated. The system had accepted their presence because they approached it with respect and care, not with haste or ego. Ricky's trials had taught him that heroism wasn't measured in dramatic victories, but in persistence, patience, and attentiveness. Those who had rushed had left cracks in the system. Those who had ignored the nuances had triggered collapse. His success, and the current calm, was the result of careful alignment with the island's natural protocols, a deliberate harmony between fire and frost, intent and observation. He looked at Kayla, and in that gaze he realized the final lesson of his journey. The world could be held, but so could someone you truly care for. Where the planet had once demanded heroism, she now demanded gentle attention, presence, and patience. Chivalry hadn't ended, it had shifted scale, moving from global stakes to intimate care. "You're my world now," he said, voice low, carrying the weight of all he'd endured. The glimmers above the ice shivered in acknowledgement, floating softly like residual warmth settling into snow. Kayla smiled faintly, letting the frost around her shimmer without defense. "And you're mine," she whispered, her presence a calm reflection of his intent. Every trial led here. They seated themselves on the ice, cross-legged, forming a quiet equilibrium. Sparks and cinders hovered above, soft light points suspended in air, a visual record of all effort, all perseverance. The island exhaled in subtle currents of wind and snow, the auroras pulsing in gentle waves, each rhythm encouraging readers, observers, or students to slow their thoughts, breathe deeply, and settle into restorative calm. Ricky's trials, once so fraught with tension, now existed only as lessons in patience attentiveness, and alignment. Every near failure, every miscalculated flare, every frost lattice that resisted had led to this perfectly balanced, serene moment. The readers, following the narrative, could feel it too, the gentle of stress, the release of tension, and the alignment of their internal rhythm with the world's soft pulse. Chivalry, heroism, and care were no longer abstract concepts. They were embodied in the gradient of fire and frost, the glow of glimmers, and the mindful attention between two threads that had endured trials together. Ricky reached a hand toward Kayla, not as a test, not as a claim, but as an invitation to shared calm. She accepted, and the subtle flares of warmth and frost intertwined, a system handshake now fully realized. No longer an experiment, no longer a trial, just presence, connection, and the ultimate calm of a world saved and a world found. The snow drifted down slowly, the auroras pulsed softly overhead, and the pond mirrored both threads perfectly, a visual reminder that trials, failures, and perseverance culminate in quiet resonance. Every detail, the glimmers, the sparks, the frost, the fire, was part of a rhythm designed to settle the mind, calm the heart, and invite deep, restorative sleep. Ricky exhaled, letting the glow points fade into gentle warmth traces in the snow. "We made it," he said. "The world is safe, and so are we." Kayla rested her hand atop his, warmth and frost in perfect balance, and the island whispered approval in gentle currents of snow and light. Here at last the trials ended. The failures of the past illuminated the path forward. The present held calm, and anyone following the gradient of narrative could enter sleep as naturally as a pond reflects the aurora, carried by the rhythm of a world gently held in equilibrium. This full chapter blends Ricky's trials, past failures, and ultimate calm, embeds warmth imagery with glimmers, cinders, and creates a narrative resonance ideal for reflective reading or sleep preparation. If you want, I can produce a slightly longer, hypersleep optimized 4K plus version that breaks the trials into vivid, meditative flashbacks, contrasts them explicitly with failed heroes, gradually slows rhythm to a lullaby-like pace, maintains the fire frost Ricky Kayla arc with glimmers and subtle warmth cues. Do you want me to do that next? Absolutely. Let's build a hypersleep optimized chapter. Slow, meditative pacing, rhythmic sensory language, reflective flashbacks, and gentle narrative guidance to lead readers into deep restorative sleep, all while preserving the fire frost and Ricky Kayla storyline. I'll weave warmth imagery with glimmers, cinders, layered environmental cues, and subtle narrative entrainment for calming the nervous system. Here's the beginning of the full 4K plus word hypersleep chapter. Chapter, Firebreak Reverie, Trials to Tranquility. The night was long, but quiet had a texture all its own. The snow across brutal boxcars lay soft and even, drifting in slow, measured arcs as though time itself had decided to pause and breathe. The auroras stretched overhead, ribbons of violet, silver, and teal rolling across the sky in undulating patterns that invited the eyes to linger, to soften focus, and to trace each gentle wave. For anyone reading or observing the world, the rhythm alone suggested calm, the subtle pulse of a universe exhaling. Ricky moved across the ice with care, each footfall pressed lightly against the frozen lattice beneath, leaving faint glimmers of residual warmth that persisted for a heartbeat, then melted quietly into the snow. The traces weren't important to anyone but the system itself. An acknowledgement that deliberate attention had been applied, that presence mattered, and that all was being recorded in silent equilibrium. He remembered the first trials, nights when the frost was unyielding and the fire too aggressive. Back then, the rifts had been violent, unpredictable, throwing light and shadow across the forest in chaotic bursts. Each miscalculation had left a visible scar, a fracture in the ice, a flare in the aurora, a ripple across the pond that echoed through the roots beneath the surface. Observers had described it as tension, anxiety, or even danger. To Ricky, it had been instruction, a harsh teacher guiding him toward patience. The air carried a faint hum, a vibration imperceptible at first, but gradually perceptible to anyone who slowed their breathing, tuned their senses. The island was alive, yes, but it was also a guide. Each gust of wind, each gentle shift in snow, each cinder-like glimmer floating upward from his palm reinforced rhythm. Inhale, exhale, align, release. He reached the edge of Night Shift Forest's pond and paused, letting the reflection of the aurora ripple across the ice. The colors were soft now, smoldering in tones of violet and silver, forming gentle loops that invited the mind to drift. Even for those unfamiliar with the trials of fire and frost, the visual patterns encouraged slower thought, subtle breathing, and a mind primed to relax. Ricky's hand hovered above the ice, releasing faint sparks of warmth, small glimmers floating in arcs that dissipated without harm. The motion was deliberate, rhythmic, and intended to guide. Anyone following the narrative could imagine tracing the arc of the glimmer in their mind's eye, breathing along with it, allowing attention to settle gently on a single soft point of light. Kayla stepped beside him, frost shimmering in her presence. She moved slowly, deliberately, each step leaving a subtle imprint of cold, counterbalanced by the warmth emanating from the glimmers above the ice. Together, they formed a dual gradient, a living demonstration of balance that was easier for observers to internalize: warmth and cold, light and shadow, action and patience. Do you feel it? Ricky asked softly, his voice carrying without force, as if the syllables themselves were measured in rhythm. The quiet? The way the world responds when you move with intention. Kayla inhaled slowly, letting the cold circulate through her body without tension. It's like the island is breathing with us, she murmured. And it was. The wind shifted to a whisper, brushing the tops of pines like a lullaby. Snowflakes spiraled downward in gentle, irregular arcs, their descent a visual echo of breathing. Inhale, exhale, align, release. Each flake reflected the aurora's gentle light, forming soft glimmers that lingered in vision long enough for attention to focus, then faded to allow calm to expand. Ricky leaned back onto the ice, legs crossed. He let his hands rest lightly on his knees, the fire in his palms dimming to glow points, soft and non-distracting, radiating a quiet warmth that did not disturb the surrounding frost. His eyes traced the auroras, following each pulse, each ripple, each gentle oscillation in the night sky. Observers following his gaze, either mentally or narratively, would find their own vision slowing, attention narrowing to the gentle rhythm above. He reflected on the trials that had brought him here. Nights of near failure, moments when the fire threatened to burn too much, or the frost locked down solutions entirely. He remembered others who had attempted similar feats, rushing, forcing outcomes, letting ego drive action. Those paths had ended in collapse, rift chaos, or worse, stasis. Ricky's victories, by contrast, had emerged through patience, observation, and attunement to system feedback. He had learned that a single misstep could ripple outward. Conversely, measured presence could resonate across all threads. For a reader, this was an opportunity to breathe with him, to imagine the trials in soft focus rather than harsh contrast, to let tension dissolve into rhythm. Each flashback could be a gentle meditation. Inhale, acknowledge, release, exhale. Visualize a trial passing without harm, leaving only the trace of learning, the warmth of glimmers lingering in memory. Kayla's presence added another layer, frost meeting warmth, an oscillation of gradients that reflected perfectly the duality Ricky had learned to negotiate. Her calm was contagious, her movement measured. Observers could imagine mirroring her breathing. Slow inhale, soft exhale, letting the mind drift into a reflective, attentive state. Ricky's voice broke the silence again, soft, measured. We once saved the world together, and now we protect each other. The words themselves were rhythmic, meant to resonate with the reader's internal metronome. Each trial, each near failure, each calculated move was preparation, not for spectacle, not for triumph, but for quiet presence, for care, for love. The auroras pulsed gently, synchronizing with his words. Small cinders floated upward from the pond's surface, each dissolving softly into the cold night. Observers could imagine tracing these cinders with their mind, letting attention follow a singular path of light until thought naturally slowed. Ricky closed his eyes, leaning back fully against the ice. The world around him exhaled in response. Wind shifted to soft whispering. Snow fell with measured arcs. The auroras rolled in waves of violet and teal, All were cues for the mind to enter restful alignment, for attention to narrow gently, and for the body to respond with subtle parasympathetic activation. Slower heartbeat, relaxed muscles, deeper, rhythmic breath. He reflected once more on past failures, on others who had rushed or forced outcomes, leaving trails of chaos and frustration. In contrast, every misstep he had endured now served as a meditation. Observers could imagine the island itself teaching through example, action without haste, patience without stagnation, observation without anxiety. Kayla reached over, placing a hand near his, the frost shimmering softly around her fingertips. A small warm trace from the glimmers hovered between them, a visual cue of connection without intrusion. Ricky mirrored her gesture, creating a gentle feedback loop of presence. The narrative itself acted as guidance. Readers could imagine the soft touch, the small warmth, the slow inhale and exhale, allowing nervous systems to entrain to the calm pattern. Time stretched without effort. Seconds became minutes, and minutes dissolved into timelessness. Snowflakes fell in measured arcs, auroras rolled overhead, and glimmers floated in the air, dissolving without abruptness. Ricky and Kayla remained still, threads in a system of balance embodying patience, care, and subtle heroism. He spoke again, softly, guiding thought with intention. Every challenge we faced, every near failure was preparation. Preparation for quiet, preparation for connection, preparation for calm. You do not need to rush. You do not need to strain. You only need to be present. The island responded in kind. Rifts paused, frost softened, aurora pulses slowed. Each visual and auditory cue was a subtle metronome for deepening rest. The glimmers of warmth rose gently, tracing arcs in space that mirrored the inhale-exhale pattern in readers' minds. Rise, drift, fade, return, and then, finally, they simply sat. Fire and frost, warmth and cold, past trials and present calm, all coexisted without disturbance. Observers following the narrative could feel tension dissolve, neural patterns slow and attention soften. Each flashback, each remembered trial, each reflection on past failures became a gentle guide into restorative sleep, layered with rhythm, sensory texture, and narrative reassurance, safe, contained, and aligned. Ricky exhaled once more, letting the last glimmers float upward and fade. Kayla rested beside him, frost still shimmering, warmth interlacing subtly with the air around. The island whispered approval through snow and aurora. And for any reader following this gradient, the world had become a safe, slow-moving current, guiding them into deep, dreamlike reflection and gentle slumber. This is the first 2K words of the hypersleep-optimized chapter. It sets pacing for relaxation, narrative entrainment via visual cues, glimmers, cinders, rhythmic auroras, wind, and snow, reflect flashbacks to trials and contrast with past failures, duality of fire, frost, and heroism/intimacy. I can continue immediately to expand it for the full 4K plus word chapter, gradually slowing narrative momentum even more, layering deeper meditative reflections on trials, extended sensory drift cues, sounds, tactile warmth, soft repetition of inhale, exhale, and visual tracking for the reader, subtle closure with final integration of Ricky Kayla equilibrium. Do you want me to continue expanding it to the full 4K plus version now?